Okay, great. We're recording. For joining it's our first meeting of 2023. So happy New Year to all. Let's get started. So the first kind of admin task will be to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting in December, December 13. They are already pushed as an issue in the GitHub repo. So you'll have a link to it in the agenda. I just shared the agenda link on the chat. If everyone agrees with that summary, we consider them approved. Okay. Let's.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, great. So no objections, so we consider them approved. Then let's move on to the first item. That's in charge of roughing. He's going to share a little bit of an update on the chain of trust issues in DDS that we discussed last meeting. If you'd like to take over, the links are on the agenda as well.
Sure. Yeah. So if you open up the ticket 282 on its ROS repo, last time we discussed about a rather glaring flaw that was sort of revealed in using or combining the identity certificate authority and the permission certificate authority allowed for issued certificates from the identity certificate authority for being able to sign their own permission documents and subsequently modify and pass muster. So obviously that defeats a lot of the access control. And I felt like that's a rather divergent abuse of or at least divergent fairly far from the spirit of the specification. So I went back and I took a kind of a closer look. And if you look at sections 9.4.1 or 9.3.1.1, they're fairly basic, and like they say that only those certificate authorities have that particular role, and they don't specify that those kind of roles can be delegated, or that signature can be subsequently allocated to an issued or signed, or sorry, a subsequently signed certificate. And if we just sort of make a sort of a counter example of, let's assume that the delegation of both permission and identity CA signature authorities is admissible, and that we do consider the issuing identity of the permission and identity CAs, and of course maybe like the axiom we're considerate of is that the only the permission CA can be used to validate the governance permission documents, and only the identity CA can be used to issue identity certificates. We kind of come up with a contradiction between the first two and the last two axioms, in that if you take given the specification does not condition how these CAs may be signed. They could be self-signed, or they could be issued by a higher order certificate authority. And as like a common paradigm in like any kind of corporate IT infrastructure, that's a common thing. You'll have like a root CA for the entire organization, and if that one CA was trusted and issued subsequently the identity and permission CAs, you could draw a train of trust all the way back up to that root CA. And if that was what you're using in your certificate authority store, that would obviously have consequences, and where that could allow the permissions CA to issue identity certificates, and vice versa with the permission CA or the identity CA issuing permission documents. So that's sort of a no-go. And if we take a closer look at how the verification is done, you can see this may be more or less like a compliance issue. So yeah, if you look at the PKC S7 verify function, the OpenSSL call that is used to verify the S-MIME or the PK7 payload, we can see that both in FastDDS and Cyclone, they are passing the certificate authority not as the set of certificates in which to search for the signer's certificate, but instead through the trust door. And doing so allows for the verification of the signature using chain of trust, but does not necessarily regulate that which certificate was signing that document. And so obviously the more specific I think interpretation would be only check that the payload is signed by this certificate. It's sort of like a little bit more reduced in terms of complexity and function. Way you kind of do that is, like I said, include only the permission CA and only that CA in the set of certificates you search for, and signing and finding a matching signature, and setting some additional flags such as no verify, which allows you, from what I can interpret, allows you to not use the chain verification, and known in turn, which I think in P7 payloads, they can contain intermediary certificates. And if you don't set that flag, I think the chain of trust can be built and used. The certificates you find inside the payload can be used as among the certificates you search for. But in some cases, I think that would allow you to extend the delegation of the signatures using intermediary certificates, and it's not something we want to do either. So we can kind of narrow down the scope by enforcing those two constraints. And so in my testing, I wanted to see, like, do all the DDS vendors behave like this? And indeed they don't. So because Fast DDS and Cyclone are using this this method of S-MIME signatures that can be exploited, the Connects DDS did not exhibit the same issue. In fact, it will refuse to even load, doing its initial sanity check, that all the documents are signed by the respective CAs, and if that fails, it just, like, errors out, because it knows that's the same check that the receiving side will similarly invoke. So if the library itself ignored it and went ahead and allowed it, the other participant that you're negotiating with is going to check it anyway and is going to shoot down that connection. So I'm pretty sure that the Connect CDS was not in my testing. It was not exploitable using the same exploit from the convenient minimal example that AMRC Benemo provided so generously. So that's my observations. Maybe some future work is like, if you're no longer using chain of trust or chain building verification, whether are you still verifying the period of validity of the CAs? That's kind of a question. I'm not sure if that's still maintained. And maybe another thing is maybe it's worth auditing all the other uses of these key stores, or sorry, these X509 trust stores that were used. What other certificates are in there? This key store isn't accidentally used in other instances, like say verifying the identity, the public identity certificates. So like if the permission CA was in fact included in there, again, that might allow the permission CA to issue identity certificates, which is against, I guess, the principle of separation in the roles of these CAs in the specification. So yeah, that's sort of my findings. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to questions.
I do have a question regarding the Connect CDS check that you did. You did it with both sides having Connect CDS, right? I'm wondering, because you said that on loading, then Connect would refuse to load, right? What happens if
Yeah,
you are listening with Connect and then you have FastDDS or Cyclone DDS trying to exploit or to take advantage of this exploit, with Connect
the,
on the other side?
definitely to test it over the wire. So the I've in the past I've always had a really hard issue getting interoperable connectivity with DDS security and different vendors. I think the current state of things is much improved since I did last tested that
Should
matrix.
should be, yeah, it should be compatible between FastDDS and Connect. At least it should be.
So if I so I'm just hypothesizing, if I were to do that full matrix with this the context of this issue, I think we would probably get where and if where the connects is if I could disable the connect DDS's own check, and connect sort of connect to a different vendor, or
Mhm.
the two other vendors tested, those two would accept the connection even with a self-signed, with a erroneously self-signed permission document. But if the other two vendors, which don't have the sanity check, if they were to transmit the tokens, Connect's DS would probably shoot it down. Um,
Yeah,
that's
I guess so.
that's my guess.
Yeah, I think as I said, I mean, I didn't have time to really investigate into this and see what we can do on FastDDS or how to do it, because having two different CAs sounds like a good thing. I'm not sure about the no verify thing. I really need to go in depth to try to understand why setting this flag?
Yeah,
So why
so
avoiding the chain there?
there's the API, the OpenSSL API is a bit muddy, given like how many flags there are and how these flags kind of maybe interoperate. But I think the non-verify is that you want to attest that the signature is valid, but you don't necessarily need to verify that the certificate you find that has signed this document is in your trust store. And so in here we if we modified the order of arguments, we would pass the permission CA in the set of certificates to search for, but we would pass a null in the store of certificates that are trusted, such that we force OpenSSL to only kind of return true this for this validity check if um, the P7 payload we provide is in fact signed by this one certificate that we're searching for. So
Okay, yeah, I
it's
understand what you
definitely
mean.
kind of awkward, but I think that's maybe that can be simplified. But that's what I was thinking. One way to kind of work around that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that way what you do is avoid the upper certificate validating your maliciously signed document, right?
Yeah, it's definitely that we can at least we'll have we can play around with different patches, and we at least know the expected behavior.
Mhm.
But maybe we can talk to some other vendors. The vendor can discuss among themselves on what they want, because then the other idea is like maybe the specification is ill-formed. Maybe it is an intention that permission document signatures can be delegated. I could kind of see that where maybe you have a huge organization and you have one permission CA, and then you have sub-organizations that are responsible for subsystems, and they need to control their own kind of scopes of permissions. So you allocate that sub-organization a sub CA with a limited expiration date or something like that. And then um, if you were to see a signature and you were to build the trust train, the trust train, you could at least check for whether the certificate was still valid or whether it's been revoked,
Mhm.
to kind of have that more minute thing. But from the specification, then where they say that the issuing identity of these CAs is held regardless. It's they could be self-signed, they could be
Mhm. Yeah,
signed by some other CA. That it doesn't seem that it's a focus or of importance to the specification.
yeah, yeah. As I said, I need to study a bit more uh, your specific findings. But I mean, I think it's a rather thorough work. It's a great starting point to fix the exploits.
It's kind of a happy coincidence that you know ROS just came about and we made this kind of rudimentary assumption, and then it uncovered something that we can fix to improve the open source DDS implementations, which is great. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of interested to see what um, maybe the other vendors think, and I'm
I don't. Does anyone from other vendors come often to the working group? I don't know.
um we used to have some folks from Cyclone, or maybe I'm misremembering when I reached out to them to try and help us get the navigation 2 stuff. So when I was working with the navigation 2 working group, but we could probably reach out maybe the next meeting or on this ticket to see if folks from Eclipse Foundation or the RTI want to comment. Certainly, good thing or Prosma.
Yeah, I think Eric would be interested in reading this for sure. And I've been commenting it with people that are more in charge of the security part on FastDDS. So we're definitely going to give this some priority right now. So
Awesome.
I've come to these meetings only irregularly, but I do work on an open source DDS implementation, though not one that ROS2 is currently seemingly interested in using. I'm on the task force that revises the spec, so
nice.
it is good to provide feedback if you can about the spec, because we definitely want the spec to be clear. I'm not sure it's directly relevant here, but I have a involvement with the OMG's DDS Foundation, so we're trying to see what the best ways of working with the ROS2 community is, and there's actually a meeting about that coming up like in a week or two. So I believe William and I'm forgetting the names now. Sorry, William and Kat, I think, are both involved in that.
Yes, awesome. That's pretty cool to that the communities are congealing and getting closer together.
Okay.
Yes, and I think that the issue that you're seeing in particular with like delegation of authority kinds of things is it would definitely be good if that was better defined.
Yeah, the I think this is something I kind of grappled with, like when I was first reading the spec, is like, oh, why do we separate these two? And it definitely has its merits, but it's very subtle. And it'd be good to see maybe more case example patterns to kind of tease out the why these might have different authority or roles. So like, do these documents, they'll have different life cycles? Like, do the identities of the people in the network change fairly frequently, but the permissions didn't usually given does not? So then that is reason to have different periods of validity for these different tokens. Those were kind of questions I had in the back of my mind when I was first reading this. And then to try and simplify everything, we made these kind of reductions, and we're just now kind of catching corner cases and where these reductions kind of manifest in undesirable behaviors or circumventing access control. But we should try and think about more deeply, like what are the merits here, and
I think there's
architecture.
other ways to interpret what's in the spec or kind of derive like how it could be used. So one thing to consider, I'm not sure if you've gone to this scenario yet, is if the identity CA can use a chain of trust, but the permissions can't.
That was my that was my kind of thinking, is like, especially when you're just working with X509 certificates and validating their who signed them. That's very intuitive and straightforward, and just considering the validity certificates of chain of trust. the permission documents was what I felt was maybe unintended. And certainly this might be an example of where people who read the spec thought that maybe the delegation is or that the chain of trust would be appropriate, and then that's the side condition is that the delegation is impossible. But yeah, what you said just now is like kind of how I had interpreted it, but I certainly can't be 100% confident. Maybe that's what they meant.
Right, and it's not specified there. Like the parts that are quoted from the spec in here, that's pretty explicitly saying, right, the identity CA is the one that issues these certificates, right? Not that it issues some other CA which issues the certificates. So
I think we could almost, like, if there was some way to when you're building a chain of trust, to have a condition that the chain of trust must pass through this point, that if you're building a chain of trust of signing of these delegated signatures on these permission documents, if you were to build trust, you had a condition that that chain of trust must pass through the permission CA, as well as I think or that the validating identity cert, and you're following the chain of trust, it must pass through the identity CA. That would kind of fix, I think, both these problems. I don't know how to express that presently with the OpenSSL API, but that might also be a workaround or alternative solution.
right, and some of that I think also depends on like requirements, right? If the use cases you're thinking of with ROS 2 like really need that delegation and chain of trust, that's good feedback too, to say like, yeah, the spec really should cover how that works. Or if you're okay with the narrower use cases that said, well, we're just gonna not deal with the delegation here.
One of the examples I was thinking of when that came to my mind when I was thinking is like, what would it be appropriate for us, especially in the cases of where you're treating as a service, or as if you're a system integrator, you're working with across several boundaries of different interfaces. So like, let's say you have an autonomous car, it has a drive-by-wire system, it's made by Ford, and then you have some third-party outfitter that is putting autonomous components on it, and then you have maybe the end user that is interacting with setting the waypoints or the business logic of I need this ride to go this way or that way. So you have these several parties involved in this same network topology, and you want to kind of sandbox each party to their respective interface. Like the auto manufacturer is not going to allow the end user to be able to set, like, velocity commands or braking steering column commands. And the system integrator is at least allowed to interface with those things, but maybe not with like brake lights or the lower level hardware interfaces. And then the end user is going to be able to set like waypoint requests, to position the car, from point A to point B, but nothing more specific. So if when you in each position has like their own CA which they can allocate, but for certain topics you only trust certain CAs, and so that was that kind of whole network I was thinking of, but I was never quite sure on how would you manifest that. in practice. But I think that's something that's very relevant in system integration for robotic networks.
The trust model from the spec is really based on the domain participant. So you'd be looking at possibly a multi-domain system for that, or getting something more complex to the spec.
Yeah, I guess the nice thing is that the spec allows for like a plug-in architecture, so people can kind of bring in their own elements to replace the default plugins, which is also pretty has a lot of foresight.
Yeah, that's certainly one aspect of it, but then it also gets a little complex too when we're seeing issues like the current issue in GitHub. Like a lot of this is really assuming the built-in plugins, right? Because if you had other plugins, these could do there might not even be a CA, right? It could do something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I had. Did we have something else on the agenda?
Yes, we have Eduardo's presenting on the PKCS updates.
Yeah, well, we revisited the design. We only did it this week. Actually, I think the pull request is from today. Originally, the design was done by some other person working at the company that's not here anymore, and it was from his fork. So we have had to kind of open a new pull request where we have addressed the comments that were there on the original design for the PKCS11 URIs. And then apart from the design, we have also migrated some of the code that we had on RMW FastRTPS or on our fork. We have moved those to a pull request for RMW DDS common, so other RMW implementations can leverage on it. And then we have a pull request on RMW FastRTPS to use that one, to use the functionality that is on the pull request for DDS common or for RMW DDS common. I don't know how else should we proceed, whether I guess we need some reviews both well, kind of everywhere, right? And maybe probably some testing here and there. I think a review on the design would be appreciated, right? Because then that kind of validates the idea, and then we can try to pursue the testing, because the implementation is kind of rather straightforward. We have it working on our fork. We have people that are actually using it. So here we're just moving functionality upstream, so other implementations can also provide this support at some point.
You have is there a reference in the PR on the
Yes,
present
so
implementation?
So on the agenda, I put a link to the design, right?
Awesome.
And then this one is pointing towards the original design pull request. So you can see all the suggestions that were done there, and then Miguel has correct things and addressing those comments. This is the pull request with kind of draft for the design. And then from here, you have a reference to the RMW DDS common pull request. I think that's this one. Yes. But I mean, you'll see it's rather straightforward. It's a couple of functions. It's 150 lines of code or something. So it's nothing. It's very straightforward. And then on FastDDS, we reworked what we had here to just use the new RMW DDS common API. That's basically the idea. If you guys could take a look and validate, then maybe we can start thinking about how to build some tests on the CI. Actually, I wouldn't know how to do that on Open Robotics Jenkins. We on FastDDS for this we have our testing suite is using this libpkcs11 library, which allows to create a virtual store, a virtual hardware store. So we can put the certificates there, and so it's kind of a bit of complexity onto the test for the automation. So I'm actually not sure how would we build that on ROS CI.
What's this test library you're using? Is it packaged and released, or do you build it from source?
Yeah, it is. No, it is packaged. It's 1 second, and I can tell you.
Well, if we don't have to vendor it, then it should be relatively straightforward to include as a test dependency. That's nice.
Well, when I was working with PKCS11, I was using OpenCryptoKey from IBM. It should be open source, right?
We're using libp11 is the one we're using. It's on APT. You have several kind of packages.
Is that like multi-platform? Like it emulates a hardware key store?
Yes, and it is. And then for that we're using soft HSM2. The other one is for the plugin for OpenSSL to understand PKCS11 URIs. The one for simulating is soft HSM2, which is multi-platform. I think.
Awesome.
Let me check.
Well, I will attempt to review your design and peek over your implementation before the next meeting. That looks awesome. Thank you so much.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Because then we can discuss how to incorporate some tests for the API, for the interface, and for the implementation, and then kind of move on. Because right now we have a merge in a branch on our fork for us to use, but we kind of want it on ROS2, so we don't have to maintain that. So that's the only thing I had, because we hadn't. I said we would like to try to rework the tutorials about creating the key store and so on the ROS2 documentation, but last meeting was like 4 days before vacation, and I came on Monday, something like that. So I haven't had much time really. So we'll make sure to do that before the next meeting.
Yeah, the holidays really snuck up on us. That's where it kind of delayed my my write up. I was like, I had it half done, and I was like, oh, gotta take a pause.
Yeah, I mean, at least they would probably change after we correct this exploit. They would change again, but just clearly stating that you should not deploy some CA private keys and so on the robot themselves. I think that would be a good starting point anyways. So
Okay.
Just for reference, I'm also leaving the link to OpenCryptoKey. Maybe it can be useful.
This is the one from IBM, folks.
Yeah, exactly. It's simulating a lot of hardware, so it's including a lot of packages for also software and hardware devices. So if you want to test and someone wants to, broad a little bit more the test environments, this is more of a plug and play solution, but it's just
That's
for
pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, I think we just decided to go for soft HSM because we found it and it was good enough for us, right? It's not that. I mean, if this one is better, then we should go for this one anyways. I'll take a note of this one.
Okay. Shall we call it a day?
Yeah, I don't see anything else in the agenda, and there are only 7 minutes before the end of the call, so I can call it a day,
Yeah,
I think.
it's fine. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Okay,
you, guys.
and the matrix. See you soon.
See you.
Ciao.
See you. Bye.